happen. This is Awkward, and these are the Awkward Interviews. I have two guests today, a little unusual, but there's a very good reason they're both here with me. Zeboddios Hall, an activist in Denver, was running around with somebody he didn't necessarily know, but that's not his fault. This guy was everywhere in the area during 2020, the George Floyd Black Lives Matter protests. And although this individual did not fit in, Zebodios has certainly been quoted previously as saying that he was a unique individual, drove a hearse, had AR-15s in there, and things like that. This person did present himself as someone like me, a leftist activist fighting for the cause. And as we're going to find out, we'll learn more about that individual. Zebodios was one of a few people who ended up talking to my other guest, Trevor Aaronson. Trevor is a contributing writer for The Intercept, 2020 ASU Future Security Fellow at New America. He's also the author of The Terror Factory, Inside the FBI's Manufactured War on Terrorism. He created past documentary podcasts and is in the midst of airing one currently, which we're going to talk about today. And his 2015 TED Talk, How the FBI Strategy is Actually Creating US-Based Terrorists, has been viewed more than 1 million times and translated into 23 languages as of the last writing. For all I know, it's even more today. Point being, Trevor is an expert, and Zebodios probably has become one. It should be clear, if you know me, if you followed my show or anything else, that I'm well aware of FBI infiltration, CIA infiltration. That's a loose term I use because, in my opinion, all of these institutions, from local policing to federal agencies, have all been created for a very specific purpose and employed or created by the very people that want Zebodios killed. And for that reason, I'm not a big fan of these institutions to begin with, but every time we do incredible research like Trevor's going through, well, I don't know, you'll tell me, 300 documents, just, a big amount, we find out even more, and it's even more terrifying. And that is why you guys are here, to share what many still don't know. So thank you so much for joining me. I do really appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, my pleasure. So why don't we start with you, Zeb? Tell me about your background, your experience, when you met this guy and who this guy is. I haven't named him yet. I want to leave that to you, the two of you guys, to, explain who he is. And but I think let's just get started with, like, on the ground, before we did any research. What was that experience?
Well, my name is Zeb. I'm from North Carolina. Been in Denver for like 11 years. Did a lot of IT work before, I got arrested and shit, which kind of screwed my stuff. Can I curse on here? Okay. So before, I got arrested, I was working in IT, did that. I've been doing it for like off and on for 4 or 5 years, just living a simple life. I was part of the Party for Socialism and Liberation at one point, but right around when the protest started, I decided to leave because I had different views on things. But I was very involved with the movement at that point because, I'm a Black dude and, we are pretty unpopular amongst the wrong people, And
hold on. You got cut off, at least from my side. I didn't hear what you said. So I unmuted myself because I just wanted to, even before that happened, I wanted to confirm with a yes that, like, no shit, like, you can't, like, whereas a white guy can easily just skate through life, like, you can't. So, like, you know what I mean? Like, it makes sense you're part of the movement. I kind of feel like it's if you look the way you do, whether you're active or not, you're inherently part of it. But I also missed the last few words. You cut out for some reason. So
I was part of the Party for Socialism and Liberation at one point, but right around when the protest started, I decided to break off. I didn't want to have an affiliation towards a party, but I was always involved because they're saying, as soon as I came out of the wound, oh, that's a nigga, it's like, I know what I'm going to have to deal with. I'm from the South. I've seen things, but I also realize, just because people think the South is a bad place that doesn't mean anything. The South, if that was the way, is in Detroit. The South is in LA and all these places as well.
Well said.
But when the protest started, after I left PSL, I started giving speeches. I was really deep into working with different kinds of folks. Had my own political beliefs, but my thing was, hey, as working class people, you got to go across party lines and work with different folks. And being that person who wants people to work together, that's not cool. So I would talk to folks that happen to be Black nationalists, some people that were democratic socialists, communists, anarchists. My thing was, hey, we're not always going to believe in the same stuff, but we got to work together.
All right, pause.
Yeah.
For clarity, when you say that across parties, that can mean anything. And for a lot of people, and even some who look like you, that can mean talking to Nazis. And so I am just very glad to clarify with everyone on this call and anyone watching what you meant, which was not that. There are a million types of ideologies within the left. And so you're talking about breaking through any kind of got you. Keep going.
Working with Nazis, that would be kind of counterproductive. But then again, they pretty much sent one down there in a silver hearse, which is kind of like,
that's what we're here for. Go on.
So it was wild because there was so much cohesion. People who didn't have the same beliefs, they were working together. Not Nazis like the one that was sent, but we were starting to really click. We were starting to make agreements. Okay, we can work with this organization. We can do this. No one's going to think the same thing. So people even who might have come in with like bad perceptions before. They're like, okay, these people aren't bad. We're going to work together. And when people start working together, shit starts happening. So over time, people start seeing this dude in this silver hearse. And I don't know if you know about Black folks, we don't hang out with people in hearses much. Hearses aren't really our fun part. But this dude, we won't say his name yet, but this shitbag, he infiltrated through the YDSA, Young Democratic Socialists of America. I'm not saying that, it was that they let him in, but I think they were very young and they were like maybe, easily impressionable. But after he gets in cool with these people, everyone thinks, well, if he's cool with DSA, but that wasn't the case. It was a slimy move, and it was real bold that the government would literally send a white dude that looks like a fascist to go tell people, hey, where the cops are going to be over here, or this is going to happen. But it was so bold, but they did it. And, I see a lot of people always talk about how, well, how could you just not notice? I mean, dude, it's the federal government. They sent another shitbag with pink hair posing as a sex worker down to the Springs. It was scary. But even after all that shit happened, dude, I'm just like, still I'm more committed than I was before. The fact that they're silent and not saying anything is like, it's like your silence is saying, okay, it was all right that George Floyd was murdered. He had to ask for his mama. All these other people were killed. It was okay, because we don't have to make a comment. It's just funny how the government works, especially when it comes to Black and brown folks, and even good working class white folks like yourself. It's when there's something out there and they're accused of something, they'll stop it, cat. They'll say, well, there's no proof of this. We don't do that. But when they are presented proof, it's just no comment. It's like the shittiest thing possible. You're caught red-handed. It's like, you're going to court and there's a shitbag rapist, okay? And they're caught. They've got the video, they've got everything. And this shitbag rapist, he says, they ask him, did you do this? No comment. We know you fucking did it. Why aren't you gonna say anything? So yeah, sorry I went on a tangent, but I'm just like, I'm just happy about this being out.
Good. Yeah. And that makes me happy. The only reason they want to kill me, because I look just like them, right? I mean, as soon as I shaved my head, cops started coming up and talking to me, and I'm like, oh, if you had any idea who I am. The reason they want to kill me is because I'm Jewish, not because I look different. But anyway, what you said is really poignant. It happens with corporations as well. We know exactly what they're doing, whether it's dumping gas in a lake or setting up their fracking site in a Black poor community, and that's just the environmental stuff. They're like, yeah, and they move on. They might pay a fine. No, there were no CEOs going to prison for the destruction of our economy in the last recession, which they did knowingly. They watched it happen. They made it happen, taking advantage of poor people again. But then there were 13,000 plus arrests during George Floyd peaceful protests, 97 or 98% peaceful. And so, it comes as no surprise. And that is why independent journalism, because the media, also corporate, they're not going to tell the truth about it. That's why podcasts like this are so important. And as someone who spent 20, I'll just say 20 years on the ground, safety and security, and that's critical. I mean, I never experienced that I know of. But I can imagine, having spent, let's just say, a long time with someone, having organized actions, maybe slept next to this person in a random house, to find out that they were an FBI agent would totally blow my mind. Trevor, take it from here.
Yeah. So I come to this story from a background of reporting on the FBI and the FBI's counterterrorism program, and particularly its use of informants and its informant program. And I think what a lot of people don't know or don't appreciate is that there are more registered FBI informants today than there are agents. If you look at it in a historical perspective, during COINTELPRO and J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI had 1,500 informants. Today, that number is 10 times that amount, 15,000 informants. And the brief history of this, obviously, in the post 9/11 era, is that these informants were used to ferret out what the FBI thought would be terrorism plots. They went into mosques and Muslim communities around the country looking for people interested in terrorism. Not finding those people, they would then engineer these plots. And so these informants would be paid, in excess of 6 figures a year to find someone who was vulnerable, maybe didn't understand the religion very well, maybe easily manipulated, and then they would provide them with a bomb. Once that's accepted, they're arrested, and it's announced to the public as a terrorism plot foiled. And, there were hundreds of these cases that really exaggerated the threat of terrorism from Muslim communities throughout the country, because there were all of these incentives built into the system. The FBI got all this money from Congress for counterterrorism. They then paid informants to find cases. Informants only get paid when they find cases. And so that created this perverse incentive that really didn't do us any good as far as justice, as far as keeping the country any safer. It just created stats and numbers for the FBI. And I remember, as most Americans did during the summer of 2020, I saw everything happening on my screen. I saw the demonstrations, and I knew that there was this historical context, not only with the use of informants, but previously during the start of the Trump administration, the FBI had come out with this new term, Black identity extremism, which was the FBI's definition of Black activists as being potentially violent, potentially terrorists even. And so those two factors combined, the previous use of informants in counterterrorism missions in Muslim communities, plus the clear perception that the FBI had that Black activists could become terrorists or extremists, made me think that they would use these tactics against Black Lives Matter demonstrators, racial justice demonstrators. And I spent a good amount of time trying to find an example of that, and really at first struggled, and then eventually, came to Zeb's case. And what we found were hundreds of internal reports from the FBI and dozens of hours of undercover recordings that showed that the FBI took this man, I'll name him, I don't think we've named him yet, Mickey Windecker, and hired him, paid him thousands of dollars every few weeks to infiltrate the racial justice movement, accuse real leaders and real activists like Zeb of being informants themselves. And once that leadership vacuum had been created, he then encouraged these protests to become violent. And, I think what's really troubling about this case is that it raises this question, to what degree did some of the violence and vandalism we saw during the summer of 2020 demonstrations, to what degree was that inspired or was responsible, or was the FBI responsible for that kind of violence?
Yeah, without a doubt. A couple things. There was a guy, I think he was named like the Umbrella Man in Minneapolis, who shot at the the police station. It was worse than that, worse in the sense of, I guess, increased violence beyond that, I believe. And everyone was saying it was a Black Lives Matter activist who did it. Turned out it was a Nazi in disguise. And so, yes, there's so many instances of this, and there's a point I'm going to get to that you touched on, that it's really wild, the tactics, and there's specific aspects to it that you called out. But I also just want to bring attention to something that was released, or that I at least got my hands on 3 years ago now, almost, in June 2021. It was an anti-terrorism initiative under Biden that classified someone like me, anyone who opposes capitalism, and I'm quoting, corporate globalization and governing institutions which are perceived as harmful to society, those people are deemed domestic violent extremists. As a result, and you can correct me, you probably know better than I do, Aaron, but it is my understanding that a lot, because I see instances of it. We hear about Nazi violence, and then they go arrest, or in some cases actually kill, a leftist protester who was like planning something online. Kyle Rittenhouse is the obvious example. He kills 2 people, gets let out because he's on their side. Moving on from that, a couple things that you pointed out. It is talking about other leaders, creating this negative momentum, this like internal uprising within the organizing group that spreads all kinds of fear and distrust. It's what ruins a movement more than violence. That part really stood out to me, and I'm really curious, Zeb, to hear from you on what that was like. And then, of course, the second part being that once he seemed to gain a little bit of internal power, people started listening. He actively, intentionally increased the violence to paint a more negative light on what we know was mostly nonviolent. So, Zeb, any thoughts on that part? Like any anecdotes or feelings from that time period?
Dude, when I look back at it, there's that saying, hindsight is 20/20. But I can still say, I can look back now and say, yeah, we probably still would have been kind of confused. But dude, it's just, even after all that, dude, I just think this just reinvigorates it. There's nothing like catching someone doing something bad. Because the thing is, when you defame people, when you defame a movement, and then you get caught, now in the future, because, we've always been waiting for these things. You usually have to wait decades, and by that time, well, this person was locked up for 30 years. Well, we're going to let you out. Or, the prosecutors are gone, the officers, the agents, the judges, they're all gone. They all get away with it. But they're all still here now. And now 3 years later, I can sit back and say, hey, well, this happened in every single big city. Denver's a small city. And that makes me think, okay, well, now since we know exactly what happened, and now they can't use that, they're saying, well, you guys created violence, you can't use that anymore. It doesn't fly anymore. So even if they try to tell the media, hey, we foiled this plot. No, you created the fucking assassination plot. We know now, no matter what, you don't have to believe them. So that concept that this group that has always been doing this can be trusted, now it has everyone thinking, no, they can't be trusted at all. Because anything that they say is like, hey, you couldn't stop January 6th from happening because you were too focused on racial and housing activists. You let these beautiful people at Club Q get murdered because you were more focused on racial and housing activists. But you told the public something else. But now we know that you let those innocent people die because you were more concerned with hurting other innocent people in another innocent movement. So that brings more people together. That should bring more people together to me. Because I've talked to some activists recently, and they're saying that the people at Club Q, they've had a hard time getting money together for things. And that makes me think, hey, the government knows what happened to these people. And now that we all know, the government owes them. Because those innocent people, 5 of them, I believe, were murdered, 29 more were injured. But now we know. So this can bring another movement together, something even bigger. I believe in the idea of running it back. You ever play 21 growing up? Get your ass whipped? No, let's run it back. Let's run it back. I think we should be running it back because now we know exactly everything. And there's something I want that is so important to me. Since the courts have decided and the government and law enforcement has decided to hold this information back and say that they were doing everything correctly, and now that we know that they're not, and they're going to still say no comment, I believe it's highly imperative that everyone from every major city who got caught up start talking. Because I don't want to wait 30 years, because I'm still looking at prison, but that's okay, because I knew what needed to be done. But my thing is, I don't want anyone else to have to worry about that. I've got a daughter, she's 7 years old. I know Trevor has a child. I'm not sure if you have children, but my thing is, hey, this is a willing sacrifice to make sure, hey, we know what they're doing now, and we don't have to stay quiet. You know, a lot of people in my community and other communities, they say that my murdered leaders died for our right to vote. No, my murdered leaders died for us to stand up and say no.
Right.
And that gives us all that opportunity. Those people who were beat up in the 70s for being LGBTQ plus and all that, they stood up. They didn't have a choice. They did it. And now we see that what's been happening to us has been censored. And now we know what's out. It's time for us all to start talking. So people might not be able to reach out to Trevor because there's millions of people out there. Trevor, you're a good journalist, but it's like 320 million people in this country. But if you can't reach out to him, reach out to someone else. Talk to your neighbor. Talk to people you care about. Because now we just can't be called conspiracy theorists. We just can't be called. That's what Black people have been called for decades. Well, this is what's really happened. No. It's true. And this can create something so magnificent. Let's run it back. We lost that first game. They had us in the first half. Let's run it back.
Yeah. Oh, man, I loved a lot of that. That's for sure. I mean, we didn't solve the problem in 2020. Police spending increased in 2021. And the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act is, there's a word for this. Since I can't think of it off the top of my head, I'm going to skip it. But this term is absurd because there's no justice in policing. It's impossible. And so and now we continue to see murders of not only Black people walking, Black people sitting, Black
environmentalists with their hands up, sitting cross-legged.
Right. We're also
lied about it.
Yeah. We're also seeing that. Yeah. So movements are joining. Very positive thing. Also scary, right? Like all of the civil right, not all, that's not a fair thing to say. A lot of civil rights leaders came together maybe 20 years ago to form critical resistance because they saw that all of their like tireless, endless fighting had just strengthened the system. And so we need to figure out ways to work around it, to overcome it. And certainly in when it comes to something like this, you deserve a lot of gratitude and admiration for being willing to speak on this, because to be honest with you, like it's not something that like you would celebrate, right? Like and honestly, if I didn't know you and I didn't know the story, I would say, well, this group of people got suckered by this guy, right? Like without thinking of any other parts of it, just this guy came in and fucked with these people. You're willing to share that, and it's so important because it has nothing to do with you. It's about them and it's about him. And You're right. I think it happened everywhere. And this is why Trevor's so important. It's why I'm slightly important. There's got to be many more of me's helping you tell this story. Because I do believe that it's compelling enough that the more people hear it, not only compelling, but fact-based, hard to dismiss. So in spite of the mainstream media never uh, the mainstream media is never going to loosen its ties to corporate America and the prison and military industrial complexes. It just is what it is. And that's why people with large followings outside of that are so important. And your story is so important. Trevor, do you have any more figures or data on, or even a belief as to what degree this may have impacted the movement in 2020? And do you have any ideas as to how we might be able to keep our eyes out even better, have better operational security, and as Zeb said, run it back?
Yeah, so what we know from, that we can establish as fact based on documents and recordings is that nationally during that summer, the FBI used a program called social media exploitation, where it was specifically building intelligence files on activists based on their activity on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and other social media platforms. So basically, without warrants, collecting information on Americans who were not suspected of crimes, right? The only reason they were being targeted by the government for that kind of surveillance was because of First Amendment protected activity. We know that happened nationally. What we know about infiltration of the racial justice movement, we can confirm in Colorado, not only in Denver, but also, as Zeb mentioned, in Colorado Springs. And so I think, it's not unreasonable to assume that if that type of strategy was happening in Colorado, that the SOMEX program or social media exploitation was happening in tandem nationwide, that there were other cases in other cities where this was happening. I think that's not an unreasonable conclusion or assumption. I also think, as Zeb and you were mentioning, that throughout that summer in cities nationwide, there were people reporting very suspicious characters who had entered their activist circles, and they would say, well, maybe there's infiltration. And I think what the cases in Colorado show is that there is reason to think that may well have been the case, that this wasn't a conspiracy theory. And what we're hoping from Alphabet Boys is that by telling this story of what happened in Colorado, we can kind of unearth other cities where this happened and other cases where this happened. I also want to flag, very quickly too, that I think the other thing that our story shows is that this is really a question of FBI priorities. So as Zeb mentioned, as the FBI in Colorado Springs, south of Denver, was infiltrating the activist community, was trying to set up activists in gun crimes, they were told about the man who would later commit the Club Q shooting, a man who ran a neo-Nazi website. They opened an investigation of him and then promptly closed it as they continued this investigation of racial justice activists, raising the question if the FBI was too distracted by these activists to see the real threat, which was this future mass shooter. And then secondly, it just came out last week in the Proud Boys trial that the FBI had informants inside the Proud Boys, but was not asking those informants about the Proud Boys. They were asking those informants about Antifa activists, showing again that the FBI was highly focused on left-wing activists at the expense, I would argue, of American safety by ignoring these kind of larger right-wing threats. And I think those are the two issues that I think are critically important that this show presents.
Yeah, very, very true. And so weird that it's the same FBI. And maybe there is some backwards reason for it. Like maybe it is propaganda disguised. Like the FBI is also the organization that released the study on infiltration of police departments by the right. Why would you even want to tell us that? Well, maybe, if I'm really thinking out there, maybe it's because by doing that, you're saying it wasn't inherently white supremacist to begin with. Is that like some kind of strange reason for that report? Or maybe like to your point earlier, it's like they kind of drop little, presents to make people think they're doing one thing, when they're really busy doing something else. And as we also know, it's not just the FBI. And I can't believe Trevor, you were the first to mention Alphabet Boys. I think I hadn't even said it. So Alphabet Boys is what I heard about first. It's a really cool name. As a hip hop kid, I love that name. Our graffiti crew was Evil Boys. Something with boys always does it for me. But more importantly than that, it's what Alphabet Boys stands for. And this podcast that I believe are you two doing it together, or can you explain that part actually? And then I'll give my take on the whole thing.
Yeah, so Alphabet Boys is a multi-season podcast. This is the first season. And so every season we're telling a single story over 10 episodes in a narrative documentary fashion, with the idea of looking at the various federal agencies, federal law enforcement agencies, and the cases that they make, with this question of whether the FBI is catching bad guys or creating them through these stings. And so this first season was about what happened in Denver, and Zeb is the central subject of it as the target of the FBI surveillance.
Okay. Very cool. All right. So yeah, so season 1 is what we've been talking about, right? Going forward, it seems like Trevor, you're going to maybe take on the DEA or the ATF. These are other domestic organizations that we've been led since birth to believe are there to, at a national level, protect us from poisonous drugs, poisonous foods, poisonous weapons. That's not always the case. I read a book many years ago called Bitter Pills about the pharmaceutical and healthcare industry, and it's gotten a million times worse since. But basically, doctors give you the medicines that they're, that the salesperson they like the most gave them. And that's the case a lot of the time. And a lot of the times the CEOs of those corporations making the medicines find themselves on the board of the DEA. We all know the ATF and Branch Davidian, and there's a million other cases with them. So I'm really excited for the next couple seasons, that's for sure. I really love this language. We explore cases that are both dangerous and absurd in order to ask this question, as Trevor posed it a minute ago: are America's top cops catching criminals or creating them? I would say that America's top cops are criminals and they're creating them. Any thoughts on that? On what individuals like Zeb should be doing to protect themselves and or to get their experiences over to you, or anything you want to share on the upcoming seasons?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of what we're trying to do with Alphabet Boys is kind of tell the true story of how these agencies operate. I think if you look at the FBI in particular, this has been an agency that has very effectively used American soft power, films, TV, to present this image as this flawless agency that's always on the side of good. And that's just not the case. This is a very complicated picture. And so what we're trying to show is how these agencies, incentivized in various ways, by funding, by political pressures, pursue cases that aren't in the best interest of the United States, aren't in the best interest of justice, and in some cases, create criminals. Like in Zeb's case, trying to find activists and then set them up in crimes because the FBI believes these people not to be criminals, but they just believe them to be suspicious in general because of their own biases. And so for the next season, we're looking at a case involving a DEA case where that mixes up the FBI and the CIA. There were no criminals. It was, in fact, one of these cases where the DEA was investigating a guy who was with the CIA, who'd previously worked with the FBI. And just an example of the agencies creating crimes among themselves without actually creating other crimes. But certainly, there's
example of absurd.
Yeah, and the great thing about Alphabet Boys is there's no there's a number of cases that we could pursue. If you look at ATF stash house stings, where they tell young men if they rob this house, they're going to find $1 million in cash, and then they rob them, and then and then arrest them and accuse them of being the type of criminal who has $1 million, right? Just setting it up the whole way. And obviously, I think what's important about these shows as well is what we are trying to show in the case of Zeb is that the FBI and federal law enforcement, these practices disproportionately have affected people of color. And what's really absurd right now is you have this committee run by Jim Jordan right now, making it seem like FBI and federal law enforcement are biased against right-wing activists. And that's just not true. There are certainly cases where the FBI has investigated right-wing activists, but on the whole, if you look at the history of the FBI, and particularly in the last 20 years, this is an agency that has disproportionately affected people of color and has disproportionately affected activists on the left. And so in this particular first season, certainly we're paying attention to how the FBI went after left-wing political activists, but we're not using each season to look at political activism necessarily. We're mainly looking at some of the abusive practices that these agencies pursue. And I guess on your other questions, what I would say is I think the most important thing for people out there to understand is how these agencies work, what methods they use. You know, you can listen to the first season of Alphabet Boys and see very clearly the ways that Mickey was trying to entrap people in crimes. And I think understanding that is really, you know, the best defense you can have in kind of, you know, being an activist or just, you know, operating in the world in general.
Sad that you would add that last part. My gosh. Because I've always known I put myself in harm's way one way or another. If you're just a regular person who wants nothing to do with this shit, wants to avoid it, that kind of sucks even more. And Zeb, like, I say that remembering what you said, like, you're like, we don't need any other martyrs, man, just by the way. But like, you've kind of accepted that. And you know, and sorry, I'm getting lost, like, because I think, like, the point is, I don't want you to be a martyr. And creating martyrs rarely leads to the effect that idea of martyrdom you know, rarely achieves that effect, right? Again, going back to why this conversation and the show, the Alphabet Boys, is so important.
But I don't want to be a martyr. I just want to go do jujitsu, play Madden, you know, and do the simple stuff, you know.
But you know, it was the fact that it was something you said, and it means you're a good guy. It means you're a strong man. You know, you said it was something like you're willing to do it. Not, of course, not that you'd want to be. You said you have a 7-year-old daughter. Yeah, I mean, and you also want to enjoy your life, and you deserve to. And I just want to, you know, when I interview people who are either from prison or who've formerly incarcerated, we don't spend time on what they did, because that's not the important part. And likewise, I feel like that's not the important part of why the three of us are here today. It's critical to your story and to Trevor's story and to our American story about what these alphabet agencies are doing. And I'll leave it to the show to tell your story, so that, you know, we don't have to steal any of the thunder. You don't have to reiterate. But at this point, where does your case stand, and how are you feeling?
I'm on probation. I do have I just hired an attorney a few weeks ago. So I might put a GoFundMe out there, because this shit's going to probably be expensive, but we're going to go for habeas corpus. Yeah, thank you. We're going to go for a habeas corpus, see how that works out. But I look at it like this, dude. We're talking a lot about the FBI and, you know, law enforcement, but I look at the courts, though, and, you know, they know exactly what's happened. So me, I've smoked a lot of weed in my life. I failed like 5 or 6 UAs, and, you know, I was like, oh fuck, you know, I was real serious apparently, because this is federal. So the judge in my case, who asked me if I bought the gun because I was afraid of my sentencing, remember this? He asked me, and I said, yeah. First of all, then I shouldn't be there then if you knew I was afraid. But my probation officer had to file a motion to get me in substance abuse treatment. So I'm going to have to go do substance abuse treatment for smoking weed. And some people like drinking wine. I like different strains of weed. But I'm sitting here thinking, if the judge knows and the courts know this and the prosecutors know that I was fucked over, they're showing that, hey, this is just a breaking of a person to set an example to everyone else. So this isn't about me. It's about what they're doing to everybody else. Look at the people that they locked up. And now that all this is out and they're not even going to acknowledge it and they can just say no comment, the fact that I am still on probation, the fact that there are people in prison right now from 2020, now that this is out, is further proof that the government, especially our courts, are willing to hide the crimes of law enforcement. And in the process of hiding those crimes, they'll let the law enforcement go put out that propaganda. So now that it's out, it's just no comment. You have to take your motion. You have to go to substance abuse, or you have to go pick up your tray and go to the lunch line in prison. So that's why I think a massive whistleblowers movement is really needed, because, you know, they can look over a few little places, you know, a story like this. And it's sad that you can say that. But if you got a massive whistleblower movement, okay, there's too much going on. There's too much going on, because it's easy to arrest a few of us or try to slander a few of us. But now that we all know the truth, okay, more people need to start speaking their truth. We want to know what happened. Who are the agents? Who are the informants? Who are the people who screwed us over? We want to know all the plans, because the stuff that's in the Alphabet Boys is apparently, stuff they didn't want out. And now that it's out, no comment. So it's only up to the people to comment.
Yeah.
If I could add on that, I just want to point out, that like what Zeb did in this show is incredibly brave, right? Coming out and talking about his case. The FBI is among the most intimidating agencies you could possibly imagine, right? So it takes a lot of courage to come out and talk. And so I just want to say that, like, Zeb and the other people who are the targets of FBI surveillance in Denver that talked to me for this show really show a lot of courage and are really the reason that journalists like me can report on these kinds of government abuses, because it's very easy for the government to get away with abuses when the people they're abusing might think, oh man, I shouldn't talk about this because it could get worse, right? And so it takes a lot of courage to kind of get over that fear and talk about these abuses that we can make public. And so I would just say that for anyone who is kind of in a similar situation like Zeb, I know it's an incredibly scary place to be, but I think things can change if you're willing to come forward and talk about the ways that the government is abusing people.
Yeah, small changes, but that's another part of abolitionist ideology, is that we celebrate them all. We never give up. But we also understand that our struggle is part of a history of struggle, and that there isn't just an end goal. We live our lives the right way and try to build community. And to Zeb's point too, like a community of whistleblowers, the more we are united, the more powerful we are. And yes, I'm glad you reiterated what I tried to say earlier. You said it far better. Zeb, you are brave, man. And that's what I meant. Like, I admire you. Yeah, like, that's scary as hell. It's the FBI. Like, we all, like, we know what that means. And also, Trevor, like, I've received death threats. I don't know about you, but like, you're also brave, and all of us refuse to take shit. And that's what's most important. That's why we're here. And so, Trevor, do you want people to reach out to you if they've experienced similar things? Is that the right path, you think, to kind of develop this momentum?
Yeah, so we're hoping to continue to cover this. People can reach out to me. They can find me on Twitter at Trevor Aaronson, or Instagram. My website is also trevoraaronson.com. I'm really easy to find online. And so, our hope, as I mentioned earlier, is that Alphabet Boys, by revealing what happened in Colorado, we can, potentially find other people with information about similar activity in other cities. So if anyone has anything like that, please reach out. I'd love to hear from you.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I recently interviewed the team for Jesse Resniacki, and I am interviewing the team for Eric King later. I interviewed Steve Donziger earlier, I guess either earlier this year or late last year. My point being, these are all of these people have something in common, and that is that they are being persecuted for their beliefs or actions designed to benefit humanity and the earth. That's problematic. So, Zeb, any last comments? I really enjoyed having you with me today too. That, usually I interview one person. This was cool. I enjoyed it. But you also seem like a really cool guy that I would probably hang out with.
I'm all right. I want to tell everyone, who listens, it's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be scared. We're humans. We're supposed to be afraid and scared at times, but you don't have to take shit from nobody. It might not always turn out the way you want, but you don't have to take shit from nobody. I don't care if you're black, white, Jewish, man, woman, any gender or non-gender. You don't have to take shit from nobody. And if something's wrong, you say something, because if you don't say anything, it's consent. And you don't have to allow yourself to be abused.
Oh man, that is a perfect way to end it. Thank you guys. This was great. I wish you both the best. I hope you get the fuck off probation. You'll find out when you go to rehab. They're gonna laugh and if you have to go, they're gonna tell you weed's not a drug. That's what they said to me. Because we know it ain't, but And good luck with the next season, Trevor, and just keep up the incredible work. Like I said, you're brave too. Anyone targeting the Alphabet Boys is doing hard, important, serious work. So thank you both very much for joining me. Let's stay in touch. All right.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.